Brilliant. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us at this incredibly popular webinar. I'm Alexander, the founder of Bloom, and for those who don't know us, we supply vetted charity freelancers for interim, part-time or project work. I won't bang on about us, but do give us a go the next time you need extra support. So we put together today's webinar because increasing numbers of charities are approaching us for help with corporate fundraising, often because they're looking for alternatives to trusts and foundations. And typically they want to know whether it's worth investing the time and money, how much time and money they might need, and what sort of skills are required, and indeed what a plan might look like. Well, we're very lucky to have Rachel Holborow with us today, who will do her best to answer these questions and more, all in half an hour. Rachel has led corporate fundraising at Macmillan, Young Lives versus Cancer and Homestart UK. She's recently become a freelancer and has still found time to research and publish an extremely interesting and readable report on corporate fundraising based on 140 some interviews with various experts. There will be a link to this in the follow-up email. Before I hand over to her, a bit of admin. Please keep yourselves on mute throughout the webinar. If you have any questions or comments, then write them in the chat box and I will try and lob them at Rachel at appropriate points during the presentation, or we'll try and deal with them at the end if we have time. We are recording this, so don't write anything you wouldn't feel comfortable sharing with a wider audience. And with that, over to you, Rachel.
Thank you so much for that lovely intro. And yeah, just say really delighted to have you all here today. As Alexander said, it's going to be a bit of a whistle-stop tour. I'll be covering quite a lot in half an hour. So if there's anything that's not clear or you want clarification on, chuck it in the comments. And if we don't get to it, I'll try and follow up afterwards with you. So I'm just going to share my screen now and we'll get cracking. Right. Can everybody see that? Alexander, I can't see anyone else now, so you have to tell me. Can everyone see that?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Okay, marvellous. Well, let's get stuck in. So today, as I said, we're going to be having a bit of a whistle-stop tour. I'll be looking at the foundations of developing corporate partnerships program, looking at your case for support, your fundable offers, really taking a strengths-based approach to this, and then looking at the small, consistent steps that make corporate partnerships accessible to everyone, and a quick look at, common mistakes, what to avoid. But before we start, I did just want to take a moment to acknowledge the climate that we're all operating in at the moment, the fundraising climate. It's tough out there, and you will all be spinning lots of plates. The likelihood is, as Alexander mentioned in the intro, that some of you will be here today because statutory fundraising has dried up, trusts and foundations overwhelmed, and there's a limited supply of income now coming from trust and statutory. And it might be that your board of trustees has asked you to look at diversifying your fundraising and looking at corporate as a way of doing that. And whilst that is entirely possible, I just wanted to take a minute to acknowledge that to some of you might feel like another thing that you have to do on top of the many, many other plates that you're currently spinning. So whilst I don't have a magic wand to fix any of this for you, I did really just want to acknowledge that it's tough for a lot of you, and I see that, and corporate isn't a magic wand, but it does offer another route to income if done well. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. So briefly, the truth about corporate partnerships, I think that there is a bit of a misunderstanding sometimes that you have to be big or have a big infrastructure or a big team in order to develop a corporate partnerships program. And that is simply not true. There are lots of things you do need, but size isn't necessarily one of them. Corporates want purposeful and authentic partnerships. They want trust and community and credibility and agility and real stories. But none of that is rooted necessarily in the size of your organization. It's about clarity. It's about alignment. And you'll all have that in spades. It's just really knowing about how to tap into it and where to start. So the starting point for me is always the foundations. Before thinking about developing a corporate partnerships program or, speaking to corporates, outreach, you really do need to take a moment and to gather clarity on a few matters. So, what you do, why it matters, what difference support makes, what a partner can actually do with you. And that's the key word here, with you, not for you. And crucially, who is going to do this work? So, as I mentioned, a lot of you will be spinning lots of plates. And what I hope that you're not in a situation where this is just being added to your plate as something else for you to do on top of the 1,000 other things that you're already trying to manage. In order for corporate partnerships to work, you do need some dedicated time and resource. That doesn't necessarily mean a role or a team, but it does mean some dedicated time every week for somebody to do those steps consistently. It's not something you can pick up and then put down and come back to a month later or 6 weeks later. It's all about relationship building. So it does need those small, consistent steps. It takes dedicated resource and capacity. So having that conversation early doors around who is going to do this work, do you have the time for it? Is there the capacity? And has this been acknowledged by your senior team and your board in terms of the extra work that's going to put onto somebody's plate? Is really, really important. And I really can't stress that enough. I think that I've seen it all too often where a board might ask their team to look at corporate as a way of diversifying income, but it falls onto the plate of the person, sometimes the CEO or the fundraiser, who's already at absolute capacity. And that's where a lot of small charities will get stuck, because effectively they've been given a task that is not possible because they don't have the capacity to do it. So before you start, really, I would urge you to have that really realistic conversation with your leadership team and with your board, and ensure that you're ready for it and that you've been given the time to do it properly. Moving on to case for support, I'm sure that you will all have a lovely case for support, but I would say that corporates will require you to look at your case for support through a slightly different lens. So, is your case for support working for a corporate audience? So, looking at it in terms of the problem, what problem are you there to solve, and making it really real and urgent? Crucially, why does it matter to society and communities in the future? Because this is where we'll move into this a bit later on. You'll start to gain alignment with certain areas of business, all around why it matters to society. How do we solve it? Making sure that you've got a really clear model and accessible language, and that you have really set out your cause in very simple, plain terms. And what impact does your support have? Making it really specific and tangible, not abstract. And making it all about, human stories, evidence, impact, emotion, the change that you're going to create as a charity, and not a wall of stats. All of these things really matter. So looking at it through a funder's eyes, through a corporate partnerships perspective, lens, partners want to be included in your mission. They want to feel like they're coming on board with you, that they're doing something, that they're making change with you, not for you. So really, corporates will rarely just give to a cause. They support propositions that align to their business needs. So that will be all around breaking down your work into the programs that you run, the themes that you work within, whether that's well-being, education, food insecurity, health outcomes, and really making sure that you've broken that down into the themes that you can then later align with business needs. Outcomes, whether that's increased confidence, improved safety, more access to service, and then looking at the geographies and the communities that you serve, because what you'll be able to do once you've done this is shape it into really clear offers that a partner can see themselves in. And from there, you'll be able to develop fundable offers, fundable propositions. So instead of, come and support our charity, it's why not support a community hub session or fund the outreach to 10 local families. So make it named, costed, and purposeful. And when I say this, I absolutely don't mean create a load of new work that you hadn't planned on doing. This is all around packaging your existing work, your strategy, what you plan to do next year and the year after, and making it into a fundable proposition that a corporate can come on board and hang their hat on. And ensuring that you have, again, in this, wrapped up all of your other costs, your core costs. So when you're looking at breaking down fundable offers, not just looking at how much does it cost you to run a community hub session, that session itself, but how much, full cost recovery does that cost you to run that community hub session, and tying that into the corporate offer. Corporates are generally better at understanding that in order for a charity to run their services, they have core costs and overheads, and they get it. They tend to get it a lot more, in my experience, than a trust or a foundation might. So I would urge you, when looking at what you actually do and breaking that down into fundable offers for corporates, ensure that you've taken a full cost recovery approach to that, so that you're not wrapping up services that effectively then you're trying to claw back costs from somewhere else, because a corporate has only sponsored half of what it actually costs you to run that service. So I've spoken to lots of charities, lots of small charities over the last sort of year, and a common theme from what I'm hearing is that smaller charities might often look at what they lack, so what they don't have. We're not big enough, we don't have enough people, we don't have enough, we're not located in enough areas. But I would urge you to flip that on its head and really take a bit of a strengths-based approach when you're looking at the types of partnerships that you might want to develop. So looking at what you do have as a starting point, your people, your staff, your lived experience of the people that you work with, your volunteers, your trustees and their local network, place, where you're based, the local credibility that you might have and the community trust that you might have, the programs you run, what's proven, what's unique about you. And then visibility, where do you operate? What events do you go to? Are you involved in any networks? And what story are you telling? Because these are all your assets, and your assets ultimately are your advantage. And your assets will be what you go on to develop really values-aligned partnerships with. So once you've done that, and you've really articulated what your assets are, the next step is aligning your assets to the corporate world. So looking at who cares about this issue, what sort of businesses actually care about the work that we're doing, and where is that natural alignment? Who touches these communities? What businesses crucially benefit from solving this problem? Because if you can identify that, then you've got a really natural way into starting values aligned conversations, whose values overlap with ours. And then mapping sectors and organizations and decision makers, and taking some time to do that and to do it really well, I would say would then pay off down the line in the long run. So starting where there's natural alignment, not necessarily scale, not looking at, an organization that has to employ thousands of people. It really should be around where there's that natural alignment for you to develop partnerships.
Rachel, just a question that's come up from Camilla from Phase, and maybe a comment is inspired by the fundable offers, and mentioning how this is, often this will be something that small charities or charities of all size use an approach for trusts and foundations. Is there anything extra in your experience that corporates like to see when the charities are making an approach to them, that the trust and you wouldn't necessarily include in a trust and foundation bid?
Yeah, for sure. So I think for corporates, it's yes, what can they fund and how does that align to their business, but also looking at more holistically that business and the skills that they have. So would there be a pro bono opportunity, for instance, for that corporate to get involved and come and lend some of their skills to develop that service further? Are there volunteering opportunities, and what other opportunities sit around that fundable offer? Is there an opportunity for their staff to get involved to do some fundraising? It's thinking about that business as a whole, not just the money they can give you to fund a service,
Yeah.
I think would be really crucial. And I look, you mentioned earlier the research that I've recently done. Part of that research was talking to fundraisers, but also talking to CSR and ESG professionals about their experience of corporate partnerships and what it feels like from their side. And I think the most consistent piece of feedback I got from the business side was how sometimes they were made to feel like they're not human beings, like a sort of a purse, effectively, and that actually one of the things that I think we sometimes all need to remember in all of our fundraising interactions is that at the end of the day, we are just dealing with people, and corporates are no different to that. And yes, it has to make business sense, but also more often than not, they do just want to help and get involved and to get their people involved. So looking at them as people holistically definitely has a big role to play in corporate partnerships.
Thank you.
So moving on, and this is really, really important. I think sometimes, and I've been in this position many times in my career, when you're looking at developing a new pipeline, or you've been given a target and it's scary and intimidating, and you think, goodness me, where do I start? I have to now get 100 corporates onto this pipeline. How am I going to do it? I think is I understand why it feels like that, but actually breaking it down into small, consistent steps is going to generate longer term sustainable pipeline much more effectively than chucking 100 random corporates on a pipeline and not really ever following up with them. So the right 5 to 10 conversations started well, having done the work that we've just spoken about, building the foundations, having that conversation with your board or your senior leadership team around resource and capacity, and ensuring that someone in the organization has that carved into their role on a weekly basis. Looking at your case for support through a corporate lens, looking at your propositions, fundable propositions, and packaging them for a corporate audience, and then moving on to looking at 5 to 10 corporates who are really valued aligned and getting a meaningful conversation started with them is going to get you so much further than panicking and thinking, God, I need to be phoning every business in the local vicinity to try and start a conversation. So taking a step back and doing those small, consistent steps really is valuable. So looking at how do I start a weekly habit, and this would be my invitation to you after you've done some of the work that I've already spoken about, or perhaps you're already in that position where you've done that work, is ensuring that you do start a weekly habit and making it something that you stick to every week. So whether that's reaching out to 3 new contacts or reconnecting with 2 warm leads, you might have had a great conversation with them at an event, a year ago, getting back in touch and trying to start that relationship. Using LinkedIn, I think, is an underutilized tool. So ensuring that you have looked at your LinkedIn profile through a partnerships lens. So many corporates are on LinkedIn, for obvious reasons. If you start to tell your story consistently through LinkedIn, you'll be surprised at how much you'll start to get noticed. So just by posting one purposeful LinkedIn story a week, and progressing one next step with an existing conversation. So really breaking it down into small, consistent, visible action week in, week out, whilst in any given week, it won't feel like you're, moving the dial massively. Over time, I promise you, you will build momentum and you will start to see results by doing the right things consistently.
Rachel, a couple of interesting questions here raised that. First of all, from Evelyn, who says, "What are the key points of the initial conversation? What do you actually, and who do you ask for as well?" And then related to that, on a sort of broader thing, Ali's looking for examples of how a charity might be aligned with a corporate organisation. Would it be an area of concern, e.g. nature, or are there other ways of being aligned?
So key points and starting the conversation. I mean, I'd love to say, here you go, here's the answer, but it's not that simple, unfortunately. So it would really depend on the type of organisation you have, your fundable propositions, and what it is you're trying to lead in with. For some people, it might be come and fund this big program of work that we've got, and you've aligned it to your contacts and their business needs, or you might have identified that the corporate that you're calling or getting in touch with has a CSR program that really closely aligns with your program of work. So you would lead with that to say, I've done my research and I have seen these are your objectives this year. We're doing this. Can we have a chat? Because there's crossover. I would always lead with, you've done your research, it's not, and I think I come on to this a bit later, but it's not random. You're contacting them for a reason, because you understand that what you've got to offer is going to meet one of their business needs. So that would always be a lead for me. And in terms of who you contact, that would just vary from company to company. If you can find a name, absolutely, you go to that named person. Otherwise, HR is a good place to start, or PR sometimes, if what you're talking about is quite visible, and that there's a brand benefit for that organization. PR sometimes is a good place to start. What was the second question, Alexander?
Matching with the examples of how you might be aligned, how your aims might be aligned with those of a corporate organisation. Would it need to be an area of concern, or nature, outdoors, or aligned with in other ways?
Yeah, so I think thematically is always a good place to look at the themes of your organisation, and then looking at where that crosses over with different sectors. So, do you, for instance, I used to work for Homestart UK. We operated in the early years space. So looking at partners who also operate in the early years space is a good natural starting point. But then you can also dig a bit deeper within your programs of work. We developed a partnership with BT all around digital exclusion, because we were being told this was an issue that many families faced. And so we developed a partnership that not only generated funds, but we did a big pro bono piece with them where they gave us loads of devices and loads of digital connection to solve a problem. And crucially, I think that this is always a good place to start. And I mentioned this earlier. What problems are you trying to solve as an organization? If you can start there, and then you can look at businesses who, through the very nature of the business, have the tools, the expertise, and the resource to help you solve those problems, the synergy is so much more apparent to that partner. They understand why you are contacting them and why they are really well placed to come on board with you and to solve that problem together. And crucially, that partnership will make sense to their customers, because you have to remember, with any corporate, they will also be thinking about how this is being perceived in the outer world, how the general public, how their stakeholders, their board members are perceiving this partnership. So clear business alignment is always going to win the day.
Brilliant. Thank you.
So moving on to just a few common mistakes. And I'm aware we've probably only got about 5 minutes left now, so I will whiz through these. Leading with, do you have a charity of the year? If they have a charity of the year, likelihood is they will talk about their charity of the year somewhere, whether on their website, on their socials. So picking up the phone and asking if they've got a charity of the year, I think sometimes just annoys corporates. It's a bit lazy. Sending long fundraising packs or information with no real sort of invitation to talk or obvious why this works for you, why this makes sense for you. Again, it's all about doing your research and having a very specific ask, a specific reason that you're contacting that corporate, and leading as well with why it makes sense for them to be talking to you. I've seen so many fundraisers ask too early and too big, and that ultimately just alienates the corporate. If you haven't taken the time to do the relationship building, to understand that corporate's motivations, to understand what sort of ask would make sense to them, it can end up feeling just a bit alienating to ask for something too early and too big. not having clear costed propositions. We spoke about this earlier. Corporates will want to know how they can get involved. If you've not done that work and that groundwork in terms of, I know how they can get involved, it is in this program, this program, this program, and this is how much they cost, and this is how that corporate can get on board. Again, you're making life a bit harder for yourself than it needs to be. And absolutely, over and above everything else, is just forgetting that corporates are made of people. Like I said earlier, that was the biggest piece of feedback I had from my research from the corporate side, is they're just people at the end of the day. And yes, they've got their own business objectives that they have to align with, but they also, sometimes working with charities is the best part of their job. So they want to be made to feel, special and want to understand how they're making a difference. So ensuring that you remember that it's just a person at the other end of the phone or the email, just like you or I. So my takeaway is that, yeah, you might be small, but my gosh, you are mighty. This sector is full of incredible organizations doing absolutely life-changing work in communities up and down the UK, just as there are businesses. And you absolutely can play with the big cats because you've got that depth, you've got authenticity, you've got community trust, and crucially, you create tons and tons of community impact. It's just doing some of those things that I've spoken about over the last half an hour and ensuring that you're ready. Organizationally, you're ready to take the next step and to get out there and start developing some brilliant corporate relationships. So, as a takeaway from today, and this is with the assumption written in that you have had that conversation as an organisation in terms of who is doing this work. Once you get to that point, it's around looking at your case for support for a corporate audience, breaking your work into three or five fundable propositions, and then off the back of that, mapping your strengths and aligning with partners, and then developing your outreach plan from there. That's it. That's it from me.
Oh
I've
my
got
goodness.
2 minutes there. Oh.
That's fantastic. Thank you. So I'm going to try and use those 2 minutes by giving you 3 quick fire round questions, Rachel, as a sentence on each if you can. One of them you definitely won't be able to, I'll warn you. But first of all, do you recommend having a website space on your site which promotes your corporate fundraising?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Yeah,
Okay.
and it doesn't have to be massively complicated. And as a starting point, just get something up there so that when a corporate's looking at you, they can automatically see, yes, they are set up for corporate partners. I can start this conversation with them.
Second quick fire one, are you a fan of creating networking events, breakfast things, other kinds of networking?
Yeah, they can work really well, but I would say that, what's the purpose? Ensuring that you've got people there for the right reasons and the right people are there, or you're going to the right events. So, not just going to any old networking event or putting on any old networking event. Is why are you doing it? Who are you trying to get there? What sort of conversations are you trying to have?
And the third and final, which is probably a bit, you said don't ask too big too early. What are the signs where you can judge that it's the right time to ask?
So I think that that's to do with the relationship and really ensuring that you've built that relationship, you understand what that organization's needs are, where they are in their, thought process, who they need to engage internally, and have they done that, or do they still have work to do their end? You might not be talking to the decision maker, so understanding what other steps do we need to take in order to get to the decision makers. It's really taking the time to build the relationship, and as in any relationship that we have in our lives, we get a sense of when it's right to ask for things, right? It's the same with corporates. I'm like my son, he knows when it's right to ask me for a chocolate biscuit or not.
Oh, yeah. So well done, your son. Well, I mean, there are loads more questions, and I really recommend. Thank you, everyone, for contributing not just questions in the chat, but also your own experiences. I recommend anyone who hasn't had a good look through to do so. There's loads of really fantastic experience in there. But most of all, thank you, Rachel, for cramming so much in such a short time and in such a thoughtful way. Lots of highfalutin thoughts, lots of really good practical advice. It was a magnificent feast, but a very digestible one. Everyone, you'll shortly receive a follow-up email with links to Rachel's research, her Bloom profile, and if you're interested in finding out more about Bloom, not least how we can help with corporate fundraising, then there should be a link to arrange a meeting with me if you want one. There'll be a recording of this webinar coming at you early next week for you to look back through it. And finally, having fed your mind with a series of fantastic webinars so far in 2025, in December we will be nurturing your body. My other hat is that of a fully qualified personal trainer, and I will be running a free 30-minute workout, exercise, with my colleague Edward, to provide you the gift of fitness and well-being in the run-up to Christmas. Details on the way soon, and I hope you will join us then. Thank you very much again for coming and contributing the way that you've